Welcome to the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum's Zoom series, Trolleyology. My name is Kristen Fredrickson. I'm the Assistant Manager of Visitor Experience here at the museum. Thanks again for joining us today. Welcome back to everybody who I've seen many times before and all of you who've joined us for previous programs. This virtual series features programs on Pennsylvania transit history topics and stories about the trolley era and our collection that you can experience from home, usually on a Tuesday or a Wednesday. So we plan to continue these programs regularly. If you have a show that you would like to share that fits our museum mission, please let me know. It's getting harder to find presenters these days. So that would be anything about Pennsylvania transit, the trolley era, cities where our streetcars come from. And if you have a program that does not quite fit those guidelines, please reach out anyway. We occasionally will host other programs as well. And you can see the full list of upcoming programs on our website, patrolley.org, which I can share in the chat box in just a minute or two. I want to extend a very special thank you to those of you who donated when registering for tonight's program, and those of you who have made donations through our website or contributed to our capital campaign. We really appreciate your support, especially of our virtual outreach programs. All right, so many of you have been here before, but for those of you who are new to the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum, we were established in 1954 as the Ardent Electric Railway by a group of trolley enthusiasts called the Pittsburgh Electric Railway Club, and we opened to visitors a few years later in 1963. And the museum is actually located along the route of the trolley line between Pittsburgh and Washington, PA. You'll find almost 50 trolleys and electric railway cars at the museum. About 20 of them operate. And we get about 30,000 visitors per year who take the 4-mile scenic ride at the museum. And before we get started today, I wanted to give everybody an update about what is going on with our new building that we expect to open later this year. You can see it on the left there. Not too much has changed from that photo. They're working on the roof there. That was last month in February. And on the right, we have completed the canvas roof, tacking the canvas roof down on car 73, which is a sister car to car 66, which currently runs at the museum. This project is led by the youth. It's very exciting. So today was a very busy day in the shop. They're working on all sorts of things on this car, but the canvas roof was the latest project. On the left here, you'll see our bullet car 209. They are building a high-level platform inside the trolley display building so that visitors in wheelchairs or with disabilities can get up into the cars and basically experience like what it's like on a wooden SEPTA shelter over in Philadelphia, or platform over in Philadelphia. So there's going to be lots of decor that goes along with this, but we're currently building this in the new building. It's very exciting. On the right side here, we are pouring concrete for a safety island, and you'll see that's Volunteer Boulevard, brick paved there. And at the far end of that safety island is a bullnose. So that's full of concrete. That is a form that hasn't been poured since, we think, the 60s, probably like 1960. So that was pretty exciting. That's all part of the construction over at the new building. And here on the left, you can see they're working on the roof and the canopy along Volunteer Boulevard. This is going to give people somewhere to wait and stay out of the rain and potentially snow. And you'll be able to wait along here, along this nice platform. And on the right, we're pouring more concrete for the gazebo, the Christopher Golofsky Memorial Gazebo. So we have been very fortunate to have many mild days. We had a whopping 0.2 inches of snow in the area in February. So Monday it was in the 60s again. So work is progressing very speedily. It's very exciting. Okay, one more announcement before we get started from our friends at the East Penn Traction Club. They have their meet coming up in May 19th, 20th, 21st. If you'd like to get more information on that, head over to eastpenn.org/meet. They sponsor the largest trolley-only model meet in the country, and it'll be in Allentown. And kind of every other year, there's an East Penn meet and a West Penn meet. So the next West Penn trolley meet will be at the museum in 2024. Dates still to be announced. Okay, So now I would like to introduce today's presenter, Tom Morrow. Tom is a native of Detroit, and he grew up in Western Michigan, and his first electric railroad memory was on 11th Street in Michigan City, Indiana. Tom moved to Dayton in 1984 and has resided there ever since. He is active in the Dayton Railway Historical Society and the Cincinnati Transit Historical Association, and he runs 3 picture websites. I'll share links to those in the chat too. newdavesrailpics.com, trolleybuses.net, and daytontrolleys.net. At the end of this presentation, we will have a question and answer session with Tom, but the chat box will be open throughout the program. So please feel free to enter questions and comments during the show, and we can read through those and talk about them at the end. And just to note, the program is being recorded today, so it will be shared on YouTube within the next few weeks. All right, everybody, please keep your microphones muted, and we will now turn off our videos. Please don't be offended if I come along and turn it off. And we're going to minimize all the distractions. I'll invite everybody to turn those back on at the end. All right, Tom, take it away.
All right, let's see if I can make this share. I'm going to stop other screen sharing, and we're going to go to the slideshow. So do you all see a map? I think you do. Beautiful. So thanks for the invite. The invite and the introduction, Kristen. I am Tom Morrow, and as she says, my representation in the hobby has been to run websites. Today, though, we're going to be talking about one of the lines that ran out of Dayton, the Dayton Xenia Railway. I originally put this presentation together for a group called Cincinnati Rail Buffs, which is a meeting that Bill Van Doren organizes in Cincinnati. It used to be run by the late Earl Clark. And I put this on about a month and a half ago. Fortunately, it doesn't look like there's any repeat customers. So that's good. It'll seemingly be all new material for you. So what we're looking at right now, and the opening here is, I believe this is the Central Electric Transit Association's map of the central part of the US. It's dated probably about the mid-1920s. Where we're going to be looking at today is down in Dayton, which is circled here. And specifically, we're going to look at the Dayton Xenia Railway running between Dayton and Xenia, with also a branch that's not shown on here because by the time this map came out, it had been disestablished down to Spring Valley, Ohio. So what we're going to talk about is where the lines ran. There were 2 or 3 lines, depending on how you count. We're going to talk mostly about the origin stories of the 4 different lines that combine the 2 or 3 lines that we're going to talk about: the Dayton, Spring Valley, and Wilmington, the Dayton and Xenia Traction, Dayton-Xenia Rapid Transit, and the Dayton and Eastern. And the object here that we're going to answer the object here for tonight is to answer the question: how did they come into being? It's an interesting story with twists and turns. We're also going to talk, as Kristen had advertised, about the decline stories. The Dayton and Xenia contracted a good chunk of its footprint over let's call it first 20 years. The Dayton and Xenia contracted, they got rid of the Spring Valley line, but even before they did that, they got rid of the rapid transit. And it was I'm not going to say that it was one of the first abandonments in the United States, but it was certainly early enough that nobody really understood how to do it. All right. We got a lot better at it starting in the 1910s and the 20s and the 30s, but back in 1903 to 1905, nobody seemingly really understood how to do it. So we're going to walk through just exactly what happened. Now, what we're not going to talk about tonight is the Springfield and Xenia. That's another line that ran out of Xenia, Ohio, that went to Springfield. And now, in spite of the fact it became part of the DNX in 1928, Doc Kirkpatrick wrote the book, and there is the book that he wrote. It's meticulously researched. I mean, we've got the emails between Doc and the late Cliff Scholes and the late Harvey Hilton, among many others. And it is well worth the $25 to take a look at. Again, another interesting story, but we're not going to talk much about the SNX. So at the peak in 1907, 9 lines radiated from Dayton. And here you can see a stick diagram of the different lines and where they ran to. What we're going to look at is down at the DNX, which would be line 7, line 8, and line 9 on this list. Now, we're not going to talk about the Springfield and Xenia. That's where it ran. The Dayton and Xenia had a series of lines, as I talked about. They had multiple different operations, and they had a multitude of names, even though you seemingly say, well, how many ways can you say Dayton to Xenia? You're going to see that. And kind of answer the question, was it more of an interurban or a local trolley line? We'll leave that for you to decide. So chronologically, the Dayton Xenia Rapid Transit was the first to operate. It started operations December of 1899. It followed by the DNX in January of 1900, and that was then followed by the line to Spring Valley in April 1900. But to get to these points is an interesting story. So the players we're going to talk about tonight for the Rapid Transit, later the Dayton Xenia Rapid Transit, the promoter was J. Wayne Neff. The Dayton and Eastern, its promoter was Henry Pruden. The Dayton Spring Valley and Wilmington, the promoter was J.M. Wilson. And the Dayton and Xenia Traction Company, the promoter was J.M. Wilson. Yeah, the same guy. Interesting. The places we're going to talk about tonight on a current road map. So you can I extracted this out of Microsoft Bing. Google Maps doesn't have really easily read place names. We're going to talk about, obviously, Dayton. We're going to talk about Xenia. We're going to talk about an area called Omer Park, Belmont, Beavertown, Roslyn, Sugar Creek, Bellbrook, and then Spring Valley. We'll refer back to this map a couple different times because it helps to be able to understand. At least I'm a big fan of maps. I've been in several different presentations with my friends in Cincinnati that they talk about areas of Cincinnati that they don't ever show a map, and of course a room full of bus drivers completely understands everything. And I just kind of sit there with my mouth agape going, I don't know what this guy is talking about. So anyway, we'll revisit the maps, and hopefully it won't be too distracting to do that. We also are going to talk about Zimmerman, Alpha, and the Greene County Fairgrounds. Now, a gentleman in Cincinnati named Jeffrey Jakuzik has a wonderful website, www.jjakuzik.com. If you are interested in how any of the interurbans in Cincinnati or Dayton got into and out of the various cities and where they ran in the various counties between Dayton and Cincinnati, Jeffrey has researched it all and he's laid it out on a map. I've taken a version of his map and then superimposed lines on top of it. The black line is the Dayton Xenia Rapid Transit. The red line is the Dayton and Xenia Traction Company, along with the line down to Spring Valley. And as far as I can tell, for the most part, it's very, very, very accurate. He's meticulously researched this thing. So we'll jump back to this from time to time just to make sure we keep you grounded in where it is we're talking about. So to start the story, the first reference to a Xenia electric line I found, now that's not to say it was the first one, but it's the first one I found, was October 31st of 1895. And this is where the Dayton Xenia Rapid Transit gets a franchise to operate on Detroit Street and Main Street in Xenia. They subsequently proceed to not to build them. Not much to talk about them for a couple years. Now, the later promoter of the Rapid Transit, Neff, got his promoting start with the stillborn Xenia and Springfield Electric Railway in 1896, which we are also going to talk about. The lines between Xenia and Springfield, there were a bunch of them that various people chartered, including the Pennsylvania Railroad. The Pennsylvania Railroad went so far as to go by line poles and wire to wire the Little Miami between those two towns. But for whatever reason, they never really quite got around to it. And the only line ever built between the two towns was the Springfield and Xenia. So while the Rapid Transit was doing nothing in Xenia, as we alluded to, there were happenings further to the south in Greene County. December 12th, 1896 prompts the first meeting of the Dayton, Spring Valley, and Wilmington in Bellbrook, Ohio. It's said that a Chicago syndicate is pushing the line to Spring Valley and beyond. Now, I'm not exactly sure why a Chicago syndicate would be interested in it, but nevertheless, that's what the newspaper article said. Subsequently, the meetings follow the rest of the month, all up and down the line from Beavertown, which is today Kettering, Ohio, and Wilmington and Dorothy Lane. This is relatively local to where I'm at, all the way out to Spring Valley. Now, they project the route at 23 miles with a powerhouse in Bellbrook, which is clear at the end of the line, with the car barn in Spring Valley also at the end of the line, and they promise 15-minute service. I don't know how they're ever going to do that, a 23-mile operation with 15-minute service. But it's back in the day when these things are, well, they say things that maybe are not going to be true, or maybe they are going to be true. Who knows? So back to Jeffrey's map. Now, Kristen, can you see my arrow on here?
Yes.
Okay. So they're all going up and down the line here from Belmont all the way out to Spring Valley to try to be able to get investment. Not surprising. So there's many threads of confusion that we potentially are entering into tonight, and here's one of them. So we're going to dial ourselves ahead 2 months later, February 20th, 1897. Along with the Dayton and Xenia, J.M. Wilson is also the promoter of the Dayton, Spring Valley, and Wilmington. He is cited here as fostering the interest of the Dayton and Xenia, which is also the first mention I ever find of that entity. Maybe I didn't do a good job searching the newspapers, but it starts to confuse, the stories start to get confused a little bit. Now, at this point, the two different lines are separate entities, at least on paper they are. 2 months later, they organize the Dayton, Spring Valley, and Wilmington. You can see the president and then the several other members of the officers in the board are all from way out in Bellbrook and Spring Valley. June 29th of 1897, Omer, he subsequently creates a subdivision in Dayton called the Omer Park Subdivision, which the Dayton and Xenia will run through, asks the Dayton Board of Civic Affairs for a franchise to operate the line in Dayton. He doesn't exactly know how he's going to get downtown. He says, maybe I'm going to go to the City Railway Green Line 6 blocks north. Maybe I'm going to build my own track on Wyoming and Maine. Maybe I'm going to go to Shantz Avenue in Oakwood and go up the Oakwood Street Railway, which then prompts another year of, well, let's just call it planning. In November of 1897, the Dayton Spring Valley Wilmington incorporates in Columbus. So now we're getting serious. February 4th, 1898, the DNX buys the Dayton Spring Valley and Wilmington. They retain Wilson as the vice president, and they basically boot those guys from out in the country, in Bellbrook and Spring Valley, out. And a family enters named the Fernandings. The Fernandings are relatively famous inside Dayton. The patriarch of the family ran a rather large business selling things in Dayton. He and his sons got involved in Dayton City Railway. It's kind of important that you'll hear more about the Fernandings as we get further and further along. But the Fernandings leave their stamp on the Dayton and Xenia. And this is only the second mention I find of the Dayton and Xenia line. Interestingly enough, they will still continue to refer to the line as the Dayton, Spring Valley, and Wilmington for a little while longer. So going back to the map, this is Jakuzik's map. We're doing things here in Omer Park inside Dayton, and that's just kind of trying to give you an idea, because the impression here is we're going to build this line to go to Spring Valley, and there's not a lot of talk about going actually to Xenia. It almost seems like the Xenia part of it was an afterthought, but it turns into that's where the line really starts making its money. So now back in Xenia, from February of 1898, it's announced that the Rapid Transit wants to build a line near the fairgrounds, which is to the northeast of Springfield, or Xenia. October 14th, the newspapers report the Rapid Transit is going to get a franchise in Montgomery County, which is where Dayton is. And the Dayton Daily News rips the county commissioners up. Now, it's worthwhile to talk about here. The Dayton Daily News has an interesting record of going after different people who want to put railroads in. Those of you who might remember the name Arthur Appleyard. Appleyard got crossways with the Dayton Daily News 4 years later in trying to be able to pick up the Cincinnati, Lebanon, and Northern / Dayton, Lebanon, and Cincinnati as a way to be able to get his line, the Dayton, Springfield, and Urbana, around Dayton in order to be able to carry freight to Cincinnati. He got crossways with the Dayton Daily News, and it is literally the story when you start reading it of never try to argue with somebody who buys ink by the carload. So anyway, the Dayton Daily News has a track record in doing this. Their comments, this is taken straight out of their article. This company has no serious intentions of constructing the line and that it is holding the franchise with an ulterior object in view. In 1895, the Rapid Transit Company sought a franchise in Xenia. The company either made no progress or was intentionally lax in its duties, for no attempt was ever made, so far as known, to begin the construction of the line or to arrange preliminary detail work. This action has aroused the comment of many Daytonians who assert that a valuable privilege has been granted foreign men, meaning people from the next county over, and that a rank injustice has been perpetrated upon Dayton capitalists who applied 10 days previous. Let's take a look at that. Now, before we look at that, let's take a look at what they say the next day. They label their editorial contemptible daring. Rapid Transit Xenia City franchise dates from 1893. The section of the commissioners, meaning Montgomery County, and their dark lantern method of granting a franchise to the Rapid Transit Company, which has been building air castles between this city and Xenia for 3 years. Now, there's a company, the Dayton and Eastern, began securing the right-of-way along Xenia Pike. Now, later they say that they're going to actually build along the Pennsylvania Railroad nearby. Excuse me. The Dayton and Eastern is said to have applied for a franchise on October 5th. So that's the reference to Dayton capitalists trying to get involved. Interestingly, though, the commissioners approved the Rapid Transit franchise on October 9th with no input for the Dayton and Eastern. And thus we're going to meet our friend from the Dayton and Eastern, Henry Pruden. A little bit of background on Henry. In 1896, he ran the 3rd Street Ale Brewery. In 1897, he was one of the incorporators of the Dayton and Western that will subsequently go between Dayton and Richmond, Indiana. He's also a candidate for Dayton Council, doesn't win. He's a candidate for Montgomery County Sheriff in 1898, finished 4th in the primary. He then becomes a candidate for the Dayton Council again, candidate for state representative, and gets involved with the home telephone company in 1899. So he's got a lot of different jobs, and he's trying to move himself up in the world, I guess. He's also part of the team in 1900 to get the Dayton and Western franchise between Eaton and Richmond, and he also then becomes a rural telephone sponsor. The last we ever see of him is in 1903. He becomes the incorporator of a company to manufacture smoke preventers for steam boilers. So he's got an interesting background, but none of it is really, or at least not much of it, is rail related. So let's go back to 1898. In the ensuing days in the newspapers, on October 17th, the newspaper labels the franchise effort as, well, railroading, pushing it through. And that was found to be untrue. We come to find that Pruden's request for the Dayton and Eastern was really informal in terms of, well, not really put forward to the commissioners. He managed to miss telling that to the newspaper reporters. They allege on October 22nd, Neff's franchise for the Rapid Transit may not be legal, as it was not advertised for 4 weeks prior to award. We then come to find out Pruden's application was, well, a copy, not signed really by anybody, and reference you back to October 17th. So there's a lot of things that are going on back and forth here. So what we're talking about is the line that will run primarily in the black in that general direction, just going between Xenia and Dayton. So getting back to the Dayton and Xenia, in November of 1898, the board elects Lehi Weiskopf and Alfred Hill as president and treasurer. Wilson is still around. You remember him as the promoter. He's the vice president and general manager at this point. They describe the line as this road, which is a branch or continuance of the Dayton, Spring Valley, and Western, will join the old road at the Smithville Road. The old company building to Spring Valley is contemplated. A little less than a month later, we have this little article that's in here. J.M. Wilson, president of the Dayton, Spring Valley, and Wilmington, expects to build a road from Xenia from Dayton. That's true. Via Bellbrook. That's not true. Stated to a Herald reporter yesterday that this road would be completed by next summer. No. And the cars would be running between the Dayton and Xenia by June. No. Mr. Wilson said his company did not fear the competition of the 2 other proposed Dayton-Xenia roads. Well, that's probably not true. And that even though both roads were in operation, his company would go ahead with the work on their line. That is true. Now, the point, though, is what is very, very, very much true is that they were going to build, and they actually broke ground on Phillips Avenue in Dayton, December 21st, 1898. Going into 1899, the plot starts to thicken a little bit. The DNX completes the purchase of the Spring Valley and Western. Weisskopf and Hill are booted out as Dayton Xenia officers, replaced by a more local Dayton, Spring Valley, and Wilmington team, with Clement Fernanding in control. All right. We see a week later this little article in the newspaper. I don't know if it's an infomercial or exactly what the purpose was, but they call this Xenia and Spring Valley Transit Company of Xenia has incorporated to build, own, and operate an electric road between Xenia and Spring Valley on $5,000 capital stock. Well, the names that you see here are the names that you also find in the DNX and Dayton, Spring Valley, and Western. This is the only reference I ever found for this line to be built. It'd be kind of difficult to go between Xenia and Spring Valley, and as the terrain is not really that good, unless you follow the river, which is what the Little Miami part of the Pennsylvania Railroad did. You try to go some other direction, probably doesn't work so well. Now, February 13th, 1899, which is going to be the next few pages, the Herald summarizes where we are. So just at present, the question of electrical railroads and street railways seems to be all-absorbing topic of conversation among citizens and businessmen of this city. For several years, an electrical railway between the city and Dayton has been talked of as a possibility. It has been advocated at various times until it looked like to be a probability, but when it came to the test, the road did not materialize. Just now, however, a road of this kind connecting the two cities seems to be a certainty. And here are your three different players in this game: the Dayton and Eastern, the Dayton and Xenia, and the Rapid Transit. Now, with regard to the Dayton and Eastern, there's a lot of words here, but they don't really explain how the Dayton and Eastern is going to get into Dayton. And it is really hard to imagine the Pennsylvania is going to let them run alongside all the way. For the Dayton and Xenia, there's nothing new here. We've gone through this before with the same players. Now, the Rapid Transit. The other road is the one contemplated by Jane William Neff and in which several well-known Xenia capitalists are stockholders. The managers of this prospective road have been laying low and saying nothing, which is true. There's not been a lot in the newspapers about them, but it is evident that they have cards up their sleeves and are holding them out for a favorable opportunity to play them. When that time comes, they promise to spring a surprise on the public. This is the only road of the three prospective ones that has a right-of-way on the streets of this city, meaning Xenia. And the management has notified the city council that work of surveying will begin with the advent of more favorable weather. So Rapid Transit is kicking around. They're actually doing things. And the question is, along with a franchise, what might they have up their sleeve? Do you want me to jump in, Kristen, and answer some of the chat questions?
Oh, if you want. I didn't want to interrupt you.
Oh, I can. So the question I see here is, may I assume that these lines avoided Central State and Wilberforce, which are two historically black colleges and universities located in Xenia? In fact, the lines, as near as I can tell, they only went to the center of Xenia. I believe Central State and Wilberforce, I didn't realize Central State was in Xenia. I thought it was beyond Xenia. What town it's in, I can't remember, but the interurban lines only went as far as the center of Xenia. We'll see a photo later on that shows how far they went. Xenia had a couple local streetcar lines, and I'm not sure if they serve Central State or Wilberforce. Okay, he's got asked me once we get to the Xenia portion. Hopefully that answers the questions. And that may be something I have to go look up later. All right. So, February 17th, 1899, the Dayton and Eastern fire the next round across the bow. What are they going to do? They've made application to construct, operate, and maintain a street railway. So, that's interesting. 3 days later, in case you didn't see the article the other day, there's now an infomercial in the paper to say, hey, we filed for an application to run. And now that the weather is beginning to be more favorable, the electric lines will begin to loom up again. So let's watch the fun ensue. This is a long article, and I'm not going to read it all. I will save you that. But what I'm going to tell you is, It's an article that the Dayton and Xenia tried to get ahead of the Dayton and Eastern. And the term that people would say is steal a march on them. What they wanted to do is they wanted to be able to start building the line on Main Street in Xenia. The Dayton and Xenia did. And the way they were going to do it was they were going to show up with a crew on a Sunday morning and start digging up the street. Now, the funny part is the people who were trying to perpetrate this were discussing it in a hotel in Dayton called the Phillips House. And who might be in the Phillips House but our friend Henry Pruden, promoter of the rival road. He overhears what's going on and realizes, oh my God, they're going to get ahead of us. And if they build on that street, we're never going to be able to recover. So what does he do? Well, the whole group that is going to go pull this off has to go out Saturday night on the Pennsylvania Railroad line take the train between Dayton and Xenia, which they do. Pruden also slips in. Now, part of the reason why they were trying to do this was apparently, and I personally don't understand it myself, but it was apparently difficult to try to get an injunction on a Sunday. And so the Dayton and Xenia, their scheme was, we'll start building it on Sunday. They won't be able to stop us, and we'll get a lot of progress in before anybody can stop us by Monday morning. Pruden manages to get to Xenia, roust out a judge, and be able to get an injunction put in place before these guys can start. And this is the first step that we're going to take going to court. So we find out here, and I have to move my Zoom thing out of the way. Whoops, sorry about that, because I can't see the date. I think it's March 14th. Yep. So apparently we're seeing in this article, the Dayton and Eastern is going to follow the PRR. The Panhandle, for those of you who don't realize it, is the Pittsburgh and Lake Erie PNLE, which runs from Xenia to Dayton. And I kind of alluded to it before. We're not going to go through the Pennsylvania Railroad's interest in building an interurban between Springfield and Xenia. But the point was, the Dayton and Eastern is saying, we're going to follow the Pennsylvania Railroad. So a lot happens in a couple of weeks. We see a story from March 30th, 1899. The Dayton and Eastern started contracts with a Dayton builder for Main Street and Xenia on March 24th, with work to start on March 27th. The public hears about it, and so does the Dayton and Xenia, and they hit the Dayton and Eastern with a temporary injunction to not build. Dayton and Eastern then turns around, and they've got a contract, so they reroute the workers to Galway's farm, which is on the outskirts of Xenia. Pruden may or may not have been arrested on March 28th. I was not able to confirm that. Dayton and Eastern, of course, asks for a dissolution of the injunction. The builder, who is the guy who got the contract on March 24th, Bruno Riddy, countersues the supposed injunction plaintiff, Charles Schmidt. In reality, it was the Dayton and Xenia, for denying him the ability to work. Now, that's kind of an interesting way to sue. You're denying me the ability to work, but nevertheless, I guess you can file for anything that you want in court. Now, the Dayton and Xenia offers a flag of truce, and they offer to work together on Main Street in Xenia with the Dayton and Eastern, and the Dayton and Eastern says that won't be happening. We're not interested. A week later, another injunction. Turns out there was a long-lapse franchise from 1897 to build on Main Street, which causes another injunction to be filed, stopping both parties from building. A man named John Martin, who was the original organizer of the lighting in Xenia, had a street railway franchise, and he now wants the opportunity to renew it, even if it expired for at least 2 years. A couple weeks later, the court cases continue to drag on. And while all this is going on, the Rapid Transit is quietly continuing to build west to Dayton. May 4th, court rules against the Dayton and Eastern's request to withdraw the injunction, which clears the way for the Dayton and Xenia. The final ruling comes down 3 weeks later. The Dayton and Eastern is permanently enjoined from building on Main Street, and that's that for them. The Dayton and Xenia, though, is bogged down on Wyoming Street in Dayton. You see, back then, today, of course, that area is all the city of Dayton. But back then, Wyoming Street was the city corporation limits. And the Dayton and Xenia didn't realize that they had to deal with Mad River Township to be able to put a rail line down on Wyoming Street. So they were tied up with dealing with Mad River Township and getting a franchise to do that. Finally, the Dayton and Xenia gets the final franchise on Main Street in Xenia in October of 1899. The Rapid Transit, meanwhile, is getting a franchise in Dayton to run on City Railway Green Line on Richard Street. November 29th, the Rapid Transit starts test running in Dayton. And then on the December 15th, they start full service from Dayton to Xenia and immediately encounter a truck problem, which keeps them off the Dayton streets until all their trucks can be modified. So they started service, but they couldn't run on City Railway. January 2nd, it's noted that Dayton and Xenia is still stringing wire in Xenia. Man, that had to be cold. January in Ohio is not warm. January 18th, Dayton and Xenia cars run inside Xenia for the first time. The Rapid Transit cars are now running regularly into Dayton after they fix their truck problem. They say they're going to have hourly service. January 23rd, Dayton and Xenia starts operations from Dayton to Xenia. And on April 18th, 1900, the Dayton and Xenia line to Spring Valley gets opened. Here's another stick map. I got these or was inspired by these from some maps that the late Harvey Hilton did. And it kind of gives you a very simple explanation of where the lines ran and the different areas of town or neighborhoods that they ran through. The Dayton-Xenia Rapid Transit starts December of 1899. They end up getting bought by the Dayton-Xenia, which we'll talk about in June of 1901. They're abandoned in March 1908, and the line is removed in the summer of 1909. They enter Dayton via City Railway Richard Street on the Green Line, generally following what's today US 35. In 1905, the route gets reconfigured to go to Wyoming Street, which is Dayton and Xenia territory. The Dayton and Xenia is much more complicated to try to be able to explain. And we're going to go through most of these dates already, but the net effect is there's a lot of different operations and a lot of different places that the line is running. We also include the Dayton Xenia Rapid Transit on here because it really and truly was part of the Dayton and Xenia from 1901 to 1908. So here's Jakuzik's map again. You can see we've now got the lines in place. The black is the Rapid Transit. The red is the Dayton and Xenia. So before I get into this, let's see. None of these places were big population centers outside Dayton, not a lot of major industry. So what generated the traffic for all these lines, or is that why they were abandoned so early? We'll get into that because you're absolutely right. We're not talking about a lot of freight operations on these two lines. They were primarily passenger carrying lines. But the thing that I would want to offer at this point before we get into the details is, remember, we're talking about 1900 to 1910-ish here. Back then, there was not really an alternative. If you had an interurban railroad, you didn't have the alternative of a Model T or a truck or some of the other things that came along starting in the 1910s and then obviously getting into the 20s and the 30s. That was one of the things that caused a great deal of the consternation about trying to abandon the line. But you're absolutely right that none of these places were big population centers, although Xenia is the county seat of Greene County. So there was a little bit of traffic, but not enough traffic for two lines. So talking about equipment, Generation 1, we'll call that prior to 1915. This is transcribed from a handwritten set of notes by Charles Alleman, who worked for the Dayton and Xenia. I think he was a motorman. And it was typed in many years ago by Harvey Hilton. For interurban service, the Dayton and Xenia Traction Company had 5 closed cars from Kuhlman, numbers 10 through 18 by 2s. It's a Dayton thing. We number things by 2s, by 5s, by 10s. There's all different ways that we end up numbering our rail cars, and usually it's not sequentially. There were a couple lines that did number sequentially. And they also had 4 open cars from Cincinnati Car Company, numbers 1 through 7, and also by 2s. The Rapid Transit had 5 Barney and Smith cars, numbers 2, 4, 5, 6, and 8. I have no idea what happened to 1, 3, and 7. No clue. Now they had city service cars. There was city streetcar service in Xenia to begin with, as well as later there would be city streetcar service in Dayton. They had 2 5-window cars from the Rapid Transit, numbers 11 and 13 by 2s. They also had 3 ex-Cleveland Railway cars, number 9, 22, and 24, which were used as shuttles. And then the Dayton and Xenia had 6 Jewett single truck double end cars, 15 to 25 by 2s. So let's take a look at a few cars here. Here we see opening day on the Dayton-Xenia Rapid Transit. The backers of the Rapid Transit are here. I believe we're out at Lucas Grove, which is where their powerhouse and car house was. You can see everybody is dressed up for this brand new magical way to travel. We have car 2 shown here. It's an ex-Rapid Transit car, but at this point in time, this photo was taken long after the demise of the Rapid Transit because he is shown out here in Spring Valley. For whatever reason, and we'll talk about it in subsequent charts, the Rapid Transit loved to run, or the Dayton Xenia used the Rapid Transit cars for the line out to Spring Valley. Here's Rapid Transit car 6 at the car barn. You can see the original paint job, relatively ornate. I wish I had a better version of the photo, but it's really it kind of gives you a feel for they're trying to kind of jazz it up a little bit. This is out in Spring Valley, and this is car 6 again, and they may have been taken the same time that we saw the other shot. As I alluded to, those Rapid Transit double truck cars were used extensively on this line. So this is as far south and east as the Dayton Xenia is ever going to get out in Spring Valley, Ohio. Here's car 6 at Lucas Grove. You'll note that it is, if you count the windows, you'll note that it's an 11-window car, right? We're now going to look at the Dayton Xenia. Here's a Dayton Xenia car, number 14, and this is in its as-delivered configuration. You'll note it has 12 windows instead of 11, so that's kind of how you can tell a Rapid Transit car from a Dayton Xenia traction car. The trucks are also different too. Now, 14, we just saw it as an original DNX car. It was rebuilt as a single-ended car with baggage hauling capability. This is probably sometime after 1909. We say that because it's lettered for the Dayton, Springfield, and Xenia Southern Railway, which was what the new name was that they applied to themselves. So they modified the cars, and you can get an idea of the kinds of things they did. Here is car 3, which is an open car. This is out on Wilmington Pike in Dayton by the area of Roslyn. And this photo dates from sometime between 1909 and 1920, because we've got a destination sign on the car. Those were mandated in Dayton by the city to be put in place by 1909. And open cars were banned in the state of Ohio in 1920. So that dates the photo. Now here's car 22, which is a city car, and it was one of the ones that was supposedly an ex-Cleveland car. It's way far out in the country in Bellbrook, Ohio, on the way to Spring Valley. Harvey Hilton originally got this photo. He gave a modified presentation on interurbans in Bellbrook, Ohio. This would have been probably 15 years ago. And the way he related the story was, he said a lady came up to him and said, you know, my uncle or my father or my grandfather worked on the traction line. And Harv said, oh, that's really kind of interesting. Do you have any photos? And she said, yeah, I think I might. And a couple days later, he got a phone call and he got this photo, which we had not ever seen, at least that I know of previously. So this is special for Warren Ball. Warren is not on tonight. He's one of the Cincinnati rail buffs. He originally comes from Cleveland. This is a photo of Cleveland Car 360 out of Harry Christensen's book. You'll note it's got 8 windows. It's got a curved closed front end, and it's got a single truck. I'm going to go back to that previous chart or previous photo. If you take a look at the cars, you know, there may be a family resemblance here. Now, I had a difficult time trying to trace down. This was the best car I thought that was the best match. But you can kind of see where the Dayton and Xenia perhaps got their cars, at least 3 of their cars from. Here's another shot in Xenia of car 24, which is another one of those ex-Cleveland cars and we're looking east on Main at Detroit Street in downtown Xenia. This is car 53, which was originally car 21, and I have to apologize. I can't exactly see what's on my chart, because I've got stuff at the top and I've got a zoom menu that's in my way. But this car was subsequently repurposed into a sand car, and it's shown here on storage tracks at the barn many, many years after it was in revenue service. Here's line car 55. This is the single truck line car 55, not to be confused with the double truck line car 55, which we will subsequently see. The cars had no relation to one another except that they kind of perform the same function. Now, 21 here was originally billed as City Street Car 25, and they used 21 in the later years. It stuck around until the end of the line and the end of the rail line in 1940. They used it to shuttle crews from the car barn, and the car barn was parked about halfway out in the country in the middle of nowhere between Dayton and Xenia. And to be able to run crews back and forth, to be able to start their runs in Dayton and Xenia, they needed a car, and they used this to go and do that. The original car that had 21 was wrecked in an accident at the Pennsylvania Railroad crossing of Shakertown Pike. I don't know why they felt the need to renumber it, but they did. Car 11 has an ex-Rapid Transit City streetcar, and it's seen here at the Ohio Soldiers and Sailors Orphans Home in Xenia. Now, I would offer to you to note the trucks, the clerestory, and the platforms. You got an open platform in the back, and we got a platform that's filled in on the front. I show that to you to show you another Rapid Transit car. This is what we believe to be an original Rapid Transit car. Note that the car looks similar to the previous ones, but I don't know that it's the same. The clerestory is very similar. The trucks, they're pretty crude here. They are different. And this version of the car has both platforms open. Now, of course, one can always fill a platform in, and that may well have happened. We don't know. We are here in Dayton on Smithville Road at Highview Avenue, and this is on the line to Spring Valley. You can see in the distance what looks like a car either coming at us or going toward Dayton. This is what that same place looks like today. The church that is over here, this is Belmont United Methodist. Belmont United Methodist is here, but not with the same building, but we're at the same location. Obviously, things have grown up quite a bit.
Tom, there was a question in the chat if that single trucker was a converted horse car.
Not that I've been able to determine. It could very well have been, but from a horse car standpoint, I may be called out because there may be somebody else out here who knows more than me on this. I don't know that Xenia had any horse cars. I don't know that they did. If they did, I've never seen a reference to a Xenia horse car. And I suppose they might have been, the Rapid Transit might have been able to go shop and find themselves a horse car, but I can't say that for sure. So I'm going to walk through a few stories from the early years and then get into how we finally eventually got rid of the Rapid Transit. We're going to talk about a crash at the bottom of the hill at Phillips in Wyoming and Dayton, a race between the Dayton-Xenia and the Rapid Transit, the lines merging. Then we're going to get into the first difficulties of the Rapid Transit and what the Dayton and Xenia did to deal with them. And then the Rapid Transit kind of makes a resurgence, starts running again. Then they have an accident, and then 1908 brings the eventual death of the Rapid Transit. So car 18 of the Dayton and Xenia on its first run into Dayton loses its brakes northbound on Phillips Avenue coming down the hill. What you need to be able to understand about Dayton is the topology of Dayton is a gigantic saucer, all right? And you have, instead of a relatively small amount of hill, there's like a 200-foot hill that goes all the way around Dayton. And there are three rivers that come into Dayton and one that goes out. And this accident here was on one of the hills on Phillips Avenue coming down the hill. And it's not San Francisco, okay? I'm not trying to pretend that, but it's a decent hill, all right? And car didn't make the curve at Wyoming Street, and it wraps itself around a line pole. Ends up with 2 killed and 15 injured. Not good. So there was then a race between the Dayton Xenia and the Dayton-Xenia Rapid Transit on April 8th of 1900 to answer the question of which line gets to Xenia the fastest. The race was from downtown Dayton to downtown Xenia. Now, for the race, the Dayton and Xenia equipped a car with high-speed motors. The Rapid Transit just used the Barney and Smith cars that they had. They didn't try to soup them up or do anything to them. This was a 6 a.m. start in downtown Dayton, and the net effect is the Rapid Transit wins by 1 minute and 27 seconds, which is not surprising because they run relatively direct to Dayton. So not a surprise the Rapid Transit was faster. All right, this is the story of how the DNX and the Rapid Transit consolidated. It started on March 25th of 1901. One of the Fernandings and OOZS goes to Boston to make the deal because the Dayton and Xenia bondholders were in Boston and the Rapid Transit bondholders were in Philadelphia. After consolidation, the line will be known as the Dayton and Xenia Transit Company. It's noted both lines are unprofitable because they've been fighting tooth and nail, neck and neck at one another for over a year. Subsequently, you see another article, June 8th of 1901, indicates the plans are being formulated. That may have been just an alluding to plans to operate the lines together were being formulated, not sure. So let's get into the Rapid Transit difficulties. Compared to the Dayton and Xenia, which runs along Wyoming Street into Omer Park, the Rapid Transit doesn't have a lot of passenger operations due to where it runs. It kind of runs through the swamps of East Dayton. Once you get up on top of the hill, there's pretty much a swamp that goes from Dayton, I'd say 2/3 of the way to Xenia. It's the direct route. It's what the Dayton and Western Steam Road built in 1851 because the Pennsylvania Railroad, as we may or may not realize, had a penchant to just build straight. All right, they don't want to try and go around anything. They just built straight to get there. Well, the Rapid Transit runs in the same general corridor, and there's not a lot of people out there. Even today, that's true. So by January 1903, the Dayton and Xenia stops most Rapid Transit cars from running to downtown Dayton and forces everybody to transfer at the Green Line car barn at Richard and Linden instead. Of course, you may hear about spin in the media today. There was spin back then, and the spin was, well, this is for the better accommodation of people living along the line to get more service, except it's only as far as the barn. And as a part of this, they do allow for 3 trips to go downtown every day. Later that year in August, the schedules get changed. We go to hourly service on the Dayton and Xenia and 2-hourly Rapid Transit service. This is spun as great convenience, as now one can reliably transfer to the Springfield and Xenia, so you don't have to wait in Springfield or wait in Xenia, I guess. Now they play down the fact that no Rapid Transit cars are going down to downtown Dayton anymore. So the Dayton and Xenia is trying to be able to rid themselves of this line that doesn't generate a lot of traffic. February 1904, 88 residents along the Rapid Transit want the franchise pulled. And the rationale is it's not maintaining schedule, not running to downtown Dayton. Plus, it costs 3 cents extra to transfer to City Railway. So that kind of goes back, Ray, to your comment that none of these places were population centers because they were only able to muster 88 people to come out to complain. March 1904, Rapid Transit passengers then turn their sights on the Montgomery County Commissioners. I love the quote. That road, the Rapid Transit, is only to kill our dogs and chickens and has no other purpose. It kills our dogs and chickens because they do not run enough cars to let these creatures become familiar with a car, and when one comes, they do not know what it is. The commissioners punt on this because none of the complaints are actually in the franchise. By June of 1904, Dayton and Xenia offers to buy the Springfield and Xenia run-through cars to Dayton on the Rapid Transit, or they slide the cart across the table or pull up the tracks and use them to build the Jamestown, Ohio. Well, that doesn't happen. But I'm going to kind of touch on a few things here. This is not a real legible map. Dayton is up here in the corner, on the upper left-hand corner. Xenia is here in kind of the middle. And we've got what we're looking at is a 1902 depiction of the interurban lines that have been built and then the interurban lines that are being postulated. What is of note, I alluded to Appleyard before. On this map, this white line is showing as Arthur Appleyard has bought the Dayton, Lebanon, and Cincinnati / the Cincinnati, Lebanon, and Northern, when in fact that had not happened. The Dayton Daily News would finish up with him in the fall of 1902, prior to him being able to actually build this line, with his scheme being that he wanted to be able to run freight from Columbus all the way down here to Cincinnati. But going through Dayton is a pain in the ass. And what he was going to do was he was going to build a little bit of track here from the Dayton, Springfield, and Urbana, and he was going to run right down the Cincinnati, Lebanon, and Northern, go right into Court Street in downtown Cincinnati. It would have been perfect had he not ginned up the ire of the Dayton Daily News. All right, so we never electrify the CLNN. We have extensions here. This is Jamestown, Ohio, which is the next, I guess, the next largish or mediumish or maybe even smallish city that you get to east out of Xenia. And there you would split, one line going to Wilmington, Ohio, and another one potentially going to Washington Courthouse. But these extensions were promised. They almost seem to come up cyclically in the Xenia newspapers as, you know, being just a month away from starting to be built and never quite getting around to doing any of it. So we're going to move ourselves to July 1905. Now, the Dayton and Xenia and the Rapid Transit plan some changes, all right? They're going to talk about some routing changes. What we're showing here is this is Jeffrey Jakuzik's map, so it kind of gives you an idea of the detail he has. He's got the railroads on here, and he has the streetcar lines and the interurbans. The rapid transit is coming along here, kind of adjacent to the Pennsylvania Railroad, comes down Linden Avenue, and then goes up to Richard Street, where it jumps on the City Railway Green Line to get downtown, all right? The Dayton and Xenia comes down Ludlow Street, goes past Miami Valley Hospital, out Wyoming Street to Phillips. This is where that accident was, right here on the hill on Phillips, and then out Waterville Avenue on its way to Xenia. You'll note the rapid transit and the Dayton and Xenia at this point in time, and they've been running this way together for the last 4 years, they're only about 4 blocks apart. And Omer Park down here, this is the Omer Park area that I alluded to before. This is not what the map looks like in 1905. There are none of these streets except for these major streets that are out here. This is still area yet to be developed. But they know Omer wants to develop this area, and the Dayton and Xenia realizes this would probably be a good place to put in a city streetcar line. So they want to be able to increase the local service. Phillips Avenue and Arbor Avenue are not wide enough for double track, even today. It's amazing that the trolley buses still run there. They do, but there's not a lot of clearance. So what happens is the Dayton and Xenia reroutes the rapid transit down St. Charles Street here, gives them a straight shot in to St. Nicholas, and then they turn south on St. Nicholas to pick up Wyoming Street. There's a question here about website for Jeffrey Jakuzik's maps. It's JAKUCYK.com, I believe. All right. Anyway, we're gonna reroute here, and now all of a sudden you can run the rapid transit downtown on Dayton Xenia tracks. You don't have to pay any rent to City Railway. You don't have to make passengers transfer. It's a good thing. And they also petitioned to get another one-way line on Fairview, which is today Arbor Avenue. Good. Thanks, Kristen. Arbor Avenue, or Fairview Avenue, later Arbor Avenue, now gets a franchise to be able to build a line here. So the Dayton and Xenia is trying to be able to give themselves a presence for local city streetcar service in the east end of town. So July 1905, Dayton and Xenia gets the franchise. Now, what's really confusing about this is some articles indicate that the old rapid transit routing to that Green Line barn on Richard Street is dropped. I don't think it's accurate, because I use as the rationale for that, this is an example of one of the schedules, and this is from June 6th of 1907. It says city cars connect at Goodhue Avenue, which is St. Nicholas, and Wyoming Street, or yes, with rapid transit trains. Okay, that makes sense. Trains leave Wyoming Street and Goodhue Avenue daily for Green Line Barns. The only way they'd be able to get there was by the old routing that they had. And then it says trains leave Green Line Barn daily. So it sounds like the rapid transit is still running there. Now, I didn't allude to the second change, which is to put a line on Arbor Avenue. That's not installed until 1910, until all the business with the rapid transit blows over. But here we are. Our friend car number 6 for the old rapid transit car is inbound on that new routing eastbound at St. Charles and St. Nicholas and Dayton post 1905. We know this is true. This house still is with us today at the corner of St. Charles and St. Nicholas. So here's the line as it currently runs. We've got it all kind of tied together. Now, the decline, though, of the rapid transit continues, even though we opened the new routing August 26, 1905, and cars are apparently running downtown. 2-hour service, 1-hour service on weekends. Not bad. But by the following spring, they're still running downtown, and they've lost that extra weekend service through the winter. And it seems like the Dayton and Xenia just appears to abandon the rapid transit. They just stopped running. The farmers out in the area of Zimmerman, Ohio, get indignant. We've learned that the rapid transit personnel are moved from their operations in Xenia to Dayton. And in fact, people along the route start taking parts of the right of way back by putting fencing up. Now, that fencing business gets resolved within a few days as the rapid transit or the Dayton and Xenia starts running cars back and forth on the line, not carrying anybody, but just running it to be able to make sure people are not doing things like putting up fences or tearing up tracks. By June, the rapid transit restores service with a single truck city car. The question is whether it's an open car. We'll hear about that subsequent charts. October 1st, 1906, the Dayton and Xenia advertises local cars for Fairgrounds, Woodland Cemetery, Mount Anthony, and Barr Station. These local cars that are in the newspaper, that are being advertised in the newspaper, would go down St. Nicholas and St. Charles to Linden Avenue. Barr Station it's not the county line, but it's where the Cincinnati, Lebanon, and Northern crosses the rapid transit. And it also says rapid transit cars leave the Green Line car barn for Xenia and intermediate points. So they're still advertising they're running some sort of service. Now, whether they're going all the way to Xenia often or not, we really don't know. October 1906, the real legal challenges begin. The complaints get taken to the State Railroad Commission. Charles Darlington is your attorney and representing residents along the rapid transit division of the Dayton and Xenia traction line appeared before the commissioners and complained about the poor service of the road. Formerly, cars were run through at hour intervals, then at 2-hour intervals, now at irregular times. All right. They say that the roadbed and equipment has become out of repair. The interurban cars have been purposely withdrawn and replaced with a single truck open city car. I can't imagine trying to ride from Dayton to Xenia on a single truck city car, but apparently this is the way the Dayton and Xenia was trying to, I guess, for lack of a better term, discourage riding. And they furnish an irregular and infrequent passenger service. January 1907, the DNX changes their schedule. The Xenia cars connect to rapid transit at Barr Station. Okay, so now we're at the far east fringes of Dayton, and they're running city cars all the way out there, and then you would have to change to an interurban car. They also say they run cars from the Green Line barn. February 1907, independently of this, the State Railroad Commission pounds their fist on the table and demands improvements. April 1st, the rapid transit is back connecting at Wyoming and St. Nicholas, and also at the Green Line barn. April 20th, the rapid transit announces roadbed and bridges are to be, in their words, fixed. July 1907, the large cars come back. So maybe things are all good. Well, maybe not. July 10th, Fernanding, who's running the outfit, gets dragged before the State Railroad Commission. They want to know why their order to fix the line wasn't followed. Fernanding offers, well, the ties were laid and ballasting was delayed and we weren't able to get it done. The Railroad Commission turns around and says, you got to produce a written statement of work performed by August 15th, or bad things are going to happen. Okay. July 24th, Rapid Transit is stated as running to downtown Dayton again. And it's also reported that the Rapid Transit has sold the engines and electrical equipment at the powerhouse. September of 1907, the then envisioned Dayton Street Railway, not going to be built till February 1909, buys the Rapid Transit right away on Linden Avenue for $24,500. This is not reported in the newspaper until October 11th, and they don't post their franchise until November 11th. So it's really hard to understand what's going on. If the Dayton Street Railway owns the line, how is the Rapid Transit running on that line November 21st, 1907? We don't know. All we know is this is what's been reported in the newspaper. So things are happening. So just trying to give you, to again remind you of where we're talking. This is going to be the Dayton Street Railway is going to run here all the way out at some point to Barr Station, which is right where the Cincinnati Lebanon and Northern crosses the Rapid Transit. And what we're talking about selling is they sold this chunk of the Rapid Transit to the Dayton Street Railway. But nevertheless, the line continues to operate in some way, shape, or form. In October of 1907, an article appears that says the Dayton and Xenia and the Rapid Transit, which at this point are now in receivership, will shortly be sold. They note they have $800,000 of indebtedness. In the article, the following appears, and I note it's in caps. I've typed this out exactly as it appeared. It is admitted that since the company began operation about 8 years ago, no dividends have been paid and the interest could not be met on the bonds. Now, it's going to take us almost 2 years to see the effect of this particular piece of information as to what's being done. But in early December, something else is going to prompt some influence in a line wanting to be abandoned. And what's that? The Dayton Daily News reports there was an accident at Phillips in Wyoming on, their words, the Rapid Transit. A serious wreck, 2 killed and 25 injured. The problem is the Rapid Transit doesn't go down Phillips Avenue. It turns 1 block west at Goodhue, today St. Nicholas. And the hill from the January 1900 wreck is where the word Phillips occurs on this map. And downhill is this way. So let's take a look at the photos from the scene. The way the car is laying, this can't be Wyoming and Phillips. The car coming down the hill would be making a left turn from Phillips onto Wyoming, and a Rapid Transit car wouldn't be on Phillips. But based on the configuration in the right-hand photo, that car in the distance should be way up here and not here. And it should be on a substantial hill, and it's not. So something is amiss. So we have to look at the Dayton Herald, who described the wreck at St. Charles and Goodhue, Goodhue being today's St. Nicholas. We can find the right place. There is a hill on St. Charles, and inbound, it'd be a left turn onto Goodhue on the way to Wyoming, but it's really not much of a hill. Now, we had to read the Xenia papers to find out that this was, in fact, a shopper special extra from Xenia to Dayton, sponsored by who else? The Herald. For some reason, the Herald didn't mention that in their article. The wreck was attributed to the motorman, who was new, going too fast. 2 killed and 25 injured. Obviously a disaster for all those involved, and an item for the public to start thinking about. So January of 1908, money woes are, I can't see what I've got written here, unfortunately.
2-hour service on both
2 hour.
lines.
Yeah, they go to 2-hour service on both lines, with the walls beginning to close in. March 12th of 1908, the schedule is changed and the line stops running. Operation of Rapid Transit discontinued. The next day, they appoint a receiver for the line, and you just can't make this stuff up. Clement Fernanding is the receiver. He's a former president related to many of the officers. Now, he's certainly familiar with the operation of the line. We can't argue that. But it's just surprising that that's who they name as the receiver. March 24th, the citizens of Zimmerman, who rear their ugly head again, demand the Rapid Transit begin to operate again or vacate the right-of-way and give them their land back. April 24th, Henry Fernanding gets called before the State Attorney General of Ohio to show cause why legal proceedings should not be commenced against the Dayton and Xenia for disobeying the order of the Railroad Commission, which was to operate the line prior to the receiver appointment. Darlington announces he's going to take the case to U.S. Circuit Court. They note on May 20th, the snowplow was seen operating on the rapid transit. Apparently, to keep the line going. I'm not sure why. June 30th, it's reported the Dayton and Xenia formally abandons the rapid transit franchise in Montgomery County. 4 weeks later, it's reported they didn't really actually abandon the franchise. Who knows what the truth is? September 5th, Zimmerman people again petitioned Circuit Court to resume the operation of the rapid transit. October 8th, read what I've got up here, Kristen, because I can't read it. I apologize for this.
Dayton and Xenia announces that they'll be sold at bankruptcy.
Yes, and more arguments of the farmers, the Railroad Commission, and the court ensue. December 12th, it's announced the Circuit Court is listening to this four-part argument with farmers, the Railroad Commission, the Dayton and Xenia, and the court. The farmers claim after the DNX took possession, they practically abandoned the line. That's not exactly true, but they didn't do a good job of running it, that's for certain. The Railroad Commission complains that their order to fix and operate just wasn't followed. Meanwhile, the Dayton and Xenia is petitioning or trying to get away, is announced that they're trying to get a new franchise in Greene County, this time without the rapid transit. January 4th, 1909, the county commissioners punt that franchise request until a decision from the court comes down. The farmers' petition at that point says, we want the company to furnish service, and failing that, we want the company to surrender its franchise and get off the highway. Now, in the meantime, while all this is going on, it's reported wires being stolen, and the Dayton and Xenia are picking up switches and rail off the rapid transit. April 6, 1909, the obvious is finally confirmed. This is U.S. Circuit Court. This line is in such condition of unrepair as it renders it unsafe for operation, and that the cost for repair pending the sale of the property would cause a serious loss to the creditors, and that is for the best interest of all concerned to sell it in the condition in which the receiver found it. This course involves its non-use pending the sale, but that is within the Ohio statutory limitation, and therefore free from forfeiture and from the enforcement of orders of the commission requiring the company to make the necessary repairs to place it in operation. In other words, you guys can abandon this because we realize you're not going to make any money. Because the reality is, all they were basically doing was carrying passengers from a relatively isolated region back and forth between Dayton and Xenia. The farmers wanted this line desperately, as I kind of alluded to, by virtue of the fact they really had no other alternative. US 35 would not really come into being until the 1910s. There was not a real good way consistently to be able to get from the middle of the line to either Dayton or Xenia, if you even had a car in the first place. Now, of course, all that starts to change in the 1910s. But by the time this is going on, there's not really a whole lot of alternative that these people had. And that's kind of why they were so bent out of shape about it, which you can imagine. So now that we're done with court and the Railroad Commission and the farmers are out of the way, the county commissioners award a new franchise to the Dayton and Xenia, April of 1909. Dayton and Xenia says they're going to transfer that franchise to a new entity, the Dayton Springfield and Xenia Southern, which was set up conveniently over the winter. And that takes us to the end. June 12th of 1909, the stockholders, represented by T.J. Fernanding, yet another one, buy the railroad from the bondholders with no other bidders. Now, the line ends up being under full local control. And I would offer that October 1907 publicity fact that nobody ever made an interest payment on the bonds might well have been a factor in no other bidders. So it took a long time for us to get here. 1909, 1910, the Dayton, Springfield, and Xenia Southern comes into being. The rapid transit is dismantled, and they subsequently used the rails and wire to reconstruct the line to Spring Valley. The Dayton Street Railway takes over the Dayton operation on Linden Avenue as far as Bar Station for a while. Not sure how long exactly. They ran it for a while, and then they stopped. They cut the line back to Smithville Road, and rapid transit trackage on Linden from Richard to Xenia, Clover, and St. Charles is all abandoned. So that's among the first abandonments in Dayton. It's not the first, but it's among the first. 1910, they installed the track for the local loop on Arbor Avenue in Dayton. And so at the end of the day, after the smoke clears, the Dayton, Springfield, and Xenia Southern trades a gigantic money loser, the Rapid Transit, and an oversight attractor, which they didn't want, and replaces it with a city streetcar in a growing area, which pours nickels into their fare box. So in the 1910s, they start buying new city streetcars, both single and double truck. The Fernandings become a portion of the Winters and Clegg. It's called a syndicate. It's probably not recognized as that outside this region, but they control electric railways from Richmond, Indiana, all the way to Xenia, Ohio, and then south from the bottom end of Oakwood, Ohio, all the way to Troy. As a matter of course, when City Railway starts buying cars, so too do the Dayton and Xenia. Now, we still have the Spring Valley line, which has also been a money loser, because that's yet another line that really goes to nowhere. September 5th, 1917, the card is slid out on the table. The DNX wants to abandon the line to Spring Valley from Roslyn, which is where the CNLNN crosses that line, all the way out call it another 10 miles. Now, after much argument and interventions, that portion of the line is abandoned on or about January 1st, 1918. The point being, we go from a matter of 10 years that we can now go from, I want to abandon a line, and then within a matter of months rather than years, there's an actual process by which to go about doing that. Now, streetcar growth and economic health has always been based on new housing. It always has, always will be. All right, that's why you have places like Detroit, Cincinnati, Kansas City that are investing in streetcar lines, because instead of wanting to be able to have people build up houses, they want the houses built so they can get the tax money. Now, I'm showing here an ad that ran in the Dayton Daily News that is to try to be able to gin up people to potentially build lots in what was then going to be a suburban region, Oakwood Extension. It's not really anywhere near Oakwood. It's right along the Dayton, Springfield, and Xenia Southern. But even with things like this, it's just not going to be enough to keep the line alive. By August of 1920, there's a desire now, okay, we want to abandon another mile of the line from Beavertown down to Roslyn. That subsequently happens at the end of 1920. And so they abandoned that. And then in the early part of 1923, they abandoned the entire line all the way from Smithville Road all the way down into Beavertown. And so it took them 3 pieces to abandon it. But at the same time, the courts and the railroads are figuring out how to do it because it's happening a lot more often. So here's Jeffrey Jakuzik's map. And what happens by February 1923, that's what's left. We've abandoned the line, the rapid transit line. We've abandoned the line then all the way out to Spring Valley. So this is what we're left with for the mighty Dayton and Xenia. 1926, they enter bankruptcy again, and they reorganize into the Dayton and Xenia Railway. And at this point, the city of Xenia takes the opportunity to kick the streetcars off the streets. They keep the interurbans, but the city streetcars are done, kicked off the streets. 1928, the DNX buys the Springfield and Xenia at auction and begins to run the line. They interline some trips all the way to Dayton, which forces them to offset the trucks on 3 of the ex-Springfield and Xenia cars, the cars they bought from St. Louis Car. We'll see that in a minute. July 25th, 1934 is the last run of the SNX to Springfield. By July 1937, the city streetcar operation from downtown Dayton out Wyoming was still running, and the Dayton and Xenia began to buy and run buses. They were down to 2 rail runs a day from Dayton to Xenia. And the last Dayton and Xenia interurbans run to Xenia on September 25th, 1937. Let's see, you got a question here. Was the Dayton and Xenia affected by strikes and fare increase that affected the city streetcars after World War I? I believe they were, but I didn't put any information about that in this presentation because everybody in Dayton was affected by that. They also had some jitney competition. The first regular bus runs in Dayton, it's unclear, regular runs was one on Xenia Avenue, which kind of paralleled sort of paralleled between a city railway line and a Dayton and Xenia line. So they did suffer a little bit of competition. So this article is from October 1st, 1940, because the handwriting is on the wall. And the trolley buses take over from streetcars. Trolley buses still run today on the ex-Dayton and Xenia line in Dayton on Wyoming Street and Smithville Road, or Wyoming Street and Waterville Avenue. The DNX was the last of the 5 streetcar companies in Dayton to bring in trolley buses. In Dayton, of course, from a rail perspective, the Dayton Suburban, which is the ex-Cincinnati and Lake Erie with another 10 names associated with it, would continue until September 27th, 1941. And 3rd and 5th Street would continue until August 5th Street and then November of 1947. And then that was going to be it for rail lines in Dayton. Here's a listing of or a roster of the cars. 27 single truck city streetcar. It's kind of an interesting story. They bought apparently 2 bodies, or there are 2 bodies available, but only one of them ever got a truck and ever ran. Unfortunately, I don't have a photo of 27. 101 through 105 were bought the same time City Railway 302 to 492 was bought. They came with maximum traction trucks, and 105 kept his until the end. 107 and 109 were similar to City Railway 502 to 592. 115, 117, same as 600 to 700. Dayton and Xenia got into the used car business in 1927 with 119 and 121, which were ex-Maumee Valley cars, 125 and 130. 125 and 127, same as City Railway 800 series cars from 1925. Now, they also picked up 2 crossbench open cars that had been modified to have a center aisle and to be able to have a fence put up on the outside. They got these guys from the Dayton, Covington, and Piqua and thought to be bought around 1924 or so. They primarily used them to haul people to the county fairs in Dayton and in Xenia, which were served by the Dayton and Xenia. 150 to 156 were the last new Dayton and Xenia interurbans. They were converted for city service in 1937. I alluded to the Springfield and Xenia interurban cars that had to have their trucks moved, 160 to 164. The Devil Strip is pretty tight on Wyoming Street, and that's why they had to move the trucks off center for these guys. Subsequently, these cars had been leased, and when interurban service stopped on the Dayton and Xenia, the cars were sent back to St. Louis Car in 1937. Subsequently, the Navy leases them and loaned them to the Oklahoma Railway in World War II. So here's 103 out on Waterville somewhere. Same design as the City Railway 300 series cars, got 11 windows. It's a Cincinnati car, but it's not a curve-sider. You can take a look at the interior of 103, very comfy. You can see why you probably wouldn't want to use one of these cars on an interurban line. Heck, it's not even very comfortable to ride on a city streetcar line. Here is 107. It came with maximum traction trucks, same as a City Railway 500 series. Here's 107 himself coming southbound on Ludlow at Union Station in Dayton while they were raising the track of the Dayton and Union. This would be 1929 or 1930. Here's 107 splitting the switch at 5th and Main, and he's delaying in the background the Oakwood Street Railway here, who's trying to get through on 5th Street. I include this photo from Saul Corcus to be able to show the difference between a city or a Cincinnati car company regular car like the 101 and 107, which you can see here, and 117, which is a curve-sider. You can see the older cars are much higher and not nearly as wide. Here we have 117 out in the wilds of Southeast Dayton, same as the City Railway 600 to 700 series. It's worth noting that when these guys were in service on City Railway, if you note here, we have a very nice single big step. When they would run these cars were not permitted to run on 5th Street in Dayton because the parking was so close to the streetcar line that invariably if you sent one of these wider cars for the City Railway versions of these cars out on the line, chances are it might either come back with a car's fender or the steps knocked off because it was so close. Here's 127 taking the turn from southbound Phillips onto Wayne Street. This is, you can ride a trolley bus here today just like this. This is on Waterville. This is 150 coming up Waterville Avenue, about 3 blocks down from that last photo. He's coming northbound in 1938, getting ready to go back downtown. Here's 152 about to enter the streetcar loop at Waterville and Kingston on May 20th of 1940. This streetcar loop got put in, I'm not exactly sure when. It was in by 1931 because a lot of this area was starting to grow, and obviously Dayton and Xenia wanted to be able to extend their city streetcar line down here to be able to get plenty of nickels flowing into their fare box. What I think is kind of funny about this photo is this is not a present day photo. This is from Google Maps of 2007. The loop was going to be in this open lot, in this lot here right now. If you take a look today at the homes that are built there, they do not look like these homes. So you can tell they were built after these ones were built. What is interesting is the house is still here. The line pole is still here, as well as the street light. And I'll go back to show you. There's your line pole, and there's the street light pole, and there's the house. So it's amazing that 67 years later, you still have some of the same line poles up. It's worth also noting that the Dayton is a veritable pole museum. If you ever wanted to see the evolution of line poles, you can go down Arbor Avenue, and they've got some really ancient 1910 poles out there that I know haven't ever been replaced. You can just tell by looking at them. But there's all kinds of different ones around in Dayton. Oakwood Street Railway has some 1895 poles still in existence, but we don't want to tell the RTA and remind them that they're out there lest they take them away. All right.
A question about the curbside. Oh, maybe
yes.
This answers it. How the doors work.
Yeah, they're sliding doors on the curbsiders. All right. Let's see. So we are in Xenia here in 1936. 154 is running an interurban route. What I don't know, we don't have any color shots of the Dayton and Xenia. I don't know if this was a specifically repainted front end for visibility in similar fashion to what the Cincinnati and Lake Erie did with 125 and 127, painting the front ends yellow so as to be able to see them easier. Because the line colors were, yellow and beige. And quite frankly, while this looks dark, I think it's a reflection of orthochromatic film and just making the yellow look like it's a lot darker than it actually is. Here's 152 at the loop at Waterville and Kingston, September 3rd of 1939. The interurban portion of the line quit in 1937. These streetcars, as you see here, would run for another year or so and would be ultimately replaced by trolley buses. Here is one of those ex-Springfield and Xenia cars that had its trucks offset. And subsequently, this is out at the car barn out at the county line. This car eventually then runs for Oklahoma Railways as their number 232 in World War II. Unfortunately, I don't have a shot of the open cars as a Dayton and Xenia car, but this is it. This is one of them when it was part of the DCNP. This is prior to, obviously, 1920, because you get on the car from the outside and there is no aisle down the middle. There was a Y that they used in Dayton at J Street. If you go down on Wyoming Street today, I believe they have not filled in the pothole that leads down to a piece of Dayton and Xenia rail left in the street. This is I alluded to previously, a car 55 is the line car. This is the other car 55, same number, but a completely different car at the car barn. Service car 65 is shown here. It was originally built as their number 56 as a steeple cab freight motor, and it was rebuilt into this configuration in 1923. This is one of their two freight motors, number 75. It was built in 1922. Now note that there's a plow blade on this thing. The DNX had a snow plow. I don't have a photo of it. And when that snow plow was junked, they took the blades off it and they put it on this car, and this became the snow removal car. The other freight motor was number 85, shown here also out at the car barn. This is ex-Springfield Xenia 100, which they had this single freight car or freight motor. And this is XX Cincinnati, Georgetown, and Portsmouth. So let's talk about the aftermath of the line. 150 to 156 ended up on North Main Street in Dayton as housing during and after World War II. This is shortly after they arrived at their final home. You can see looks like we're trying to put them together. There was an article then that ran in the Dayton Daily News some short time after that, where it's noted 4 traction cars and lot in North Dayton provide housing for 4 families. Each house has 32 windows and has been remodeled. And here we see Mrs. Clyde McMakin, 4300 North Main Street, has a studio room, dressing room, kitchen, and bath. The sign, leave by rear door, is still visible, along with the car number, 156. Mrs. McMakin's streetcar has modern conveniences, an automatic hot water heater, a gas furnace, and a chime doorbell. And it rents furnished. Huh. Subsequently, these cars got roofs and they got Facebook put around the foundations. This is in 1954. I'm not sure how long exactly they lasted out there, but you can see it was, maybe the size of a trailer home, but certainly got a lot more class as an ex-rail car. We have this one, car 21, ended up as an office for a junkyard. And you can see it here. He's signed for Route 6. It is car 21. Earl Clark had this photo. This is one of the ex-Maumee Valley cars out in Wilberforce, Ohio in 2003. Not in real good shape. I don't know if that car still is with us today. Here's the former Rapid Transit powerhouse at what's today called Kilcare Speedway. It's a speedway. They used to specialize in figure-8 school bus races, which was always a riot to watch. But this is the former Rapid Transit powerhouse out there. As kind of a side point, this is the 5th Street Railroad horse car barn at Richard and Linden. It was originally built in 1890. This is a photo of it as a horse car operation on the Green Line in Dayton. You can see what they did was they took off the 2nd floor, but they've left the turreted window, and they also left the cement concrete window headers here. It's the same building, just doesn't have a 2nd floor anymore. Now, I alluded to the fact that there's rail still left around, and they left a lot of the rail in Waterville Avenue. And the reason for that is, and not to go too far off topic, but of course the rail provides a wonderful ground. And starting in the early days, a lot of different operations decided to try to use the rail ground because it was so good. After the abandonment of rail operations in Dayton on various lines in Dayton, prior to the Dayton and Xenia abandoning, there was a move to start pulling rail out. And they discovered that the minute that they started pulling rail out, there was all kinds of things around town that stopped working. So subsequent, this would be in the late 1930s, before the Dayton and Xenia abandoned, they started putting in the franchise, at least one rail will be left in the street. And so we see here, 2 rails had been left in the street in Waterville Avenue. And this is them being pulled out for a water project. As kind of an adjunct to this, Harvey Hilton once told the story of when he worked for the RTA from 1995 to 2002. He said they were really concerned about who might still be using their ground. And so he said one night they pulled all the poles down on all the trolley buses. And all the buses were in. There was nobody who was still using power for the trolley operation. And Harv said they went out to the Wyoming Street substation, which was considered to have the best ground in the system. I want to say he said they still measured 300 amps going into the ground. So there was clearly still some people were using the ground. But he said they could never really figure out who it was. But anyway, this is an example of parts of the Dayton and Xenia still live with us in Dayton streets. To that end, when we had the Hoosier Traction meet here in Dayton 2 years ago, one of the places that we went was out to Watervliet Avenue and Revere Avenue, where this chunk of rail was poking out. Of course, with a fan trip for an electric railroad association, they would like nothing better than to take a look at rail, and by God, we showed them rail. So I'm going to leave you with one last thought tonight. What do you call the line? All right. There's an easy answer in here. The Dayton-Xenia Rapid Transit was known simply as the Rapid Transit. That's simple. Now, the combined line had many names with minor modifications through the years, which I alluded to. It was the Dayton and Xenia Traction Company, the Dayton-Xenia Transit Company, Dayton Springfield and Xenia Southern Railway, the Dayton and Xenia Railway, and after rail, it became the Dayton Xenia Railway again, and later the Dayton Xenia Transit Company again, and even sometimes just Dayton and Xenia. Now, generally, and this is more of a guideline than a rule, except when the late Cliff Scholes used to describe it very, very emphatically. DNX refers to the railway operation of the interurban line, and D-X refers to the diesel and trolley bus operations. He was strident about that. Now, I would offer, except when you find exceptions to the rule, which are everywhere, and the following images will simply point out that the rule is tenuous. When I put this presentation together, I had to promise Bill Van Doren I would not put trolley buses in the presentation, but I even lied about it. I put one in anyway, and I put this one in simply because the logo that Pullman put on this bus is the rail logo. It's a D and X. They didn't know to put a different logo on there for DX. And so subsequently, these had to be painted out and the proper logo applied. Secondly, not even the company can keep themselves straight. Save time and parking troubles. Now, this is, of course, long after the rail business. Take a DNX bus direct to the heart of Dayton, and the advertisement is for the Dayton-Xenia Motor Bus Company. They can't even keep it straight, so I don't know how we can. But I tried the best I could to have DNX be rail and D-X be trolley bus. Now, with that ends the presentation. And if I can, I'd like to make a shameless plug, Kristen.
Go for it.
The shameless plug is on Saturday, March 18th at 7:30 p.m. for the Cincinnati Transit Historical Association. We're going to talk about the Cincinnati, Lawrenceburg, and Aurora Railway, or Electric Street Railroad Company. That is based on some carousels that Earl Clark had left us when he passed. And we are going to go through his carousels. It's a wonderful presentation. All are invited. And you can get information on that at www.ctha.org. And with that, I'm done. I'll take questions.
Awesome. I will let everybody unmute themselves in just a minute, but I did share the link to CTHA in the chat there.
Yeah, and I have to admittedly put the link for the Zoom out there. Once I get it from Paul, I'll put it out there. Okay. And before you get too much farther, there's a question. How do you use a ground?
Yes.
Why, what you do is you tap into a field tap that you might be able to find on the street. Sometimes that you find with some of the overhead, there are going to be taps that run down into the street. If you've got trolley bus service, you've got negative. The companies in the early days made extensive use of having rail taps. Harvey talked of one time, even in the 1990s when he started with the RTA, that one of the first jobs they gave him was to go try and find rail taps out on the Dayton Street Railway. So that's how you utilize the ground. And maybe use is the wrong word. Utilize might be better.
Okay. Yeah, and I'll let everybody unmute themselves in just a second, but lots of nice comments coming in. Our next Trolleyology program will be from Rich Krisak on April 18th. I can't remember the title of the program, but it is a Cleveland presentation. And on May 3rd, George Gula will be bringing us McKeesport trolleys. And again, I want to thank everybody who came tonight, especially those of you who donated during the registration process. We really, really appreciate it. You can head over to patrolley.org/support if you'd like to make a donation. And at this point, I am going to set it so participants can unmute themselves. Also, at this point, I invite you to turn on your video if you are unable to do so. Just let me know in the chat. I know a couple of you, I think if I turned your video off at the start of the program, you may not be able to turn it on. So just let me know. Lots of nice comments coming in. Ray Janasco says, Dayton is still the most interesting city in Ohio for any transit enthusiast, and it's interesting transit history. I think that's pretty accurate. I mean, Cincinnati had the inclines, but
well, you're not going to get a more complicated city to try to be able to explain what ran where when than Dayton, because they even went so far as, you know, the time period we're talking about here, they still had 5 separate trolley bus operators that were running on the streets of Dayton at the same time, and 6 independent streetcar lines that ran all the way up until 1933. So it is ridiculously complicated.
And you should be able to unmute yourself if you have a question for Tom. Anybody? I felt I was like, at parts of your presentation, I felt like I was watching a movie with some of the drama.
Oh my.
Tom, how long did Dayton and Xenia last as a bus company?
They went out as a bus company. Oh boy, I'm going to get the date wrong. I want to say October 1st, 1955. And that's when City Railway combined with them to form City Transit. Now, there was an intercity bus line that ran Dayton to Xenia that continued on, but the city streetcar, well, the local transit portion of the line stopped running in October of 1955.
They did order a suburban bus from GM around 1955, so that might have been for the intercity company.
Yeah, they had, there were 2 suburban buses. There were 2 GM Old Look Suburbans that they had. That may be what you're seeing, Michael.
EDH 4515s.
Yeah. They continued on and they ran for city transit for a while, but it's unclear exactly when they went away.
And the garage building is still existing, I presume.
For Dayton Xenia, I have to walk through this in my head. The original car barn burned down, became a barrel factory and burned down in 1969. They were storing very, very hazardous chemicals that when they caught on fire, it was like a 4th of July exhibition. There is a YouTube of that fire. It would be in Beaver Creek, Ohio, is what it's labeled as. That was the original, that was where the car barn was. Subsequently, they built another car barn at Smithville Road and Waterville Avenue. That thing has had 3 different operations that have been in that chunk of land. So there's not any remnants of the Dayton and Xenia infrastructure like that left. It's gone.
Well, thank you so much for this presentation.
Oh, you're very welcome.
I did get a direct message about your upcoming CTHA program and whether that will be recorded.
Well, that you would have to talk to Paul about. Typically, I think we record those, but I don't know that we make them publicly available.
Okay.
But there's no reason why we couldn't make this one available as long as Paul is willing to record it and put it up.
Sure. A comment from Jerome Joseph. Complexity is the bane of historians. So thanks for wading through so much to produce tonight's program.
Yeah, it is not. It's not simple and straightforward. That is for sure. All right.
Any other questions or comments for Tom? You guys sure are quiet tonight. I feel we got a very thorough history, and that's perhaps why we don't have any questions, because they've all been answered. Well, in that case, I think we'll go ahead and Catherine says we're just sitting here in shock.
Yeah, Charles Bogart, you are not permitted to talk.
I wasn't. I was coughing. I thought it was a great program. I'm sorry I didn't get up to Cincinnati to hear the original one, but I'm not a young guy. I can't keep running up and down to Cincinnati at night.
I know how that is.
All righty. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us.
One more question.
Go for it.
Forgive my ignorance. I'm an out-of-towner, Virginia. What is the argument for keeping the trolley buses, which I like they're keeping them, but why are they keeping them in
I can answer that. It's a green argument, but it's not the green that you think. It's not green from an ecological standpoint, which is what people will always say. The reality is that it's federal money. It's specifically federal 5339 money. And what that is known as is state of good repair funds, which funds infrastructure, fixed infrastructure that, to be able to maintain it, to be able to maintain the equipment. Dayton, I might have this wrong, but after looking at the RTA's budget sheets, Dayton is going to get $21 million of federal funding in 2023, I believe, and that's by virtue of the fact that they've got trolley buses. So it becomes an issue that if you ever tried to take the trolley buses off the lines in Dayton, their heaviest lines would now no longer have any sort of subsidy whatsoever. And somebody would have to go find buses to be able to go run those lines, and somebody would have to be able to pay to maintain those buses. So Dayton kind of figured this stuff all out. I'm going to say in the early 1990s, there was a move afoot to get rid of the trolley buses in Dayton then. And it is almost as if the trustees of the RTA figured out, oh my God, we're going to lose, not in that case, it wasn't $20 million a year, but back then it was $6 million a year. We're going to lose $6 million a year. And we have no way to be able to make that funds back up. We're certainly not out of the fare box. And so they went from a posture of we're going to kill these lines and put them out to pasture to, my God, you've stood down how many lines? Put them back up. Start running buses again. We want to keep the federal money coming in. If you go out to DaytonTrolleys.net in the history section, I've got a report that the RTA chartered in 2007 that looks at what does it cost to run diesel buses versus trolley buses. And what you find is the diesel buses are cheaper to run. Because the reality is the most expensive part of a bus operation is that individual that is sitting behind the wheel. That's what costs the most money. But when you start doing the math and say, well, the diesel buses don't bring in any federal money, but the trolley buses do, that's when it becomes a matter to say, oh, okay, I see why we have trolley buses. Kind of a long answer, but it's federal money is the reason.
Well, I think you ought to talk to Boston. And,
well, so here's the thing with Boston. That's a good point. The thing with Boston, and I don't know, is George Chason on here? He's not on here now. He can speak much more authoritatively than I can about this. But the issue with Boston is this. Boston gets so much federal money for the green line, the blue line, the red line, and the railroads that those 28 trolley buses that they had running in North Cambridge is literally a drop in the bucket. It's a rounding error for what they had. I also understand that one of the things that contributed to their problems were what was in North Cambridge was the remnant of, well, once, I don't know, Boston had, 600 trolley buses, something like that after World War II. And that was the last vestige of the trolley buses. The folks that were operating and maintaining the trolley buses, they were not part of the same union structure that works the green line, the blue line, or the red line. And so as a result, if they close things down, those people would go to the bottom of the board, and the union didn't want that. But I think they got themselves to the point where even the union didn't really want to start fighting as hard as they used to be able to keep the line running. I know it's a crappy way to go about doing business, but that's at least what I understand.
It's my understanding that the Silver Line to Logan Airport, those trolley buses, dual mode, are going to be replaced with battery electrics.
Yeah, I don't know how well that's going to work. You know, battery electrics have, you know, Dayton's dual modes are battery electrics, and what people don't seem to understand is that the charging profile that you need to have with a battery electric is not. It's not a real good thing when you have centrally located power sources. You really and truly want your power at the farthest end of the line where the buses are going to be coming back in most need of power. And so modern buses really don't react too well to low power situations. They'll operate, but they just won't operate very well. I mean, it's not like back in the days with a Marmon or a Brill that if you gave the bus, instead of 600 volts, you gave it 400 volts, it'll run just fine. It just don't run too fast. Modern buses just really and truly do not like that. And that's one of the things that Dayton is struggling with at least a little bit, is that they've got still a centrally set up power system where the substations are in the middle of the line, and optimally they really need to be at the end of the line.
One more interesting thing, if I may.
Sure.
In Boston, all diesel buses will eventually become battery electrics. And each of the battery electrics will have a small diesel engine to provide heat in the winter.
Right.
Because they realize they can't provide heat and energy to move the bus in the wintertime in that climate.
Well, yeah, you have the situation, and we've discovered this in Dayton as well, that you used to be able to get, and this is with any rail car, not just trolley buses, that you had enough heat coming out of the resistor grids that trying to get heat in the wintertime was not that big a deal. Well, a modern trolley bus has AC powered motors, which don't generate nearly the amount of heat that you don't need a resistor grid, so you don't end up being able to get that excess heat to be able to dump into the vehicle. So what you end up having to have is a heating system, which has to run on electricity. And if you start looking at we always look at these things and say, yeah, air conditioning is the hardest thing. No, it isn't. If you want the bus to be at 70 degrees and it's 10 degrees outside, overcoming 60 degrees is not for the faint of heart. So anyway.
Interesting perspective you might find interesting. I attended a short public lecture on streetcars in DC from the consultants. They said that the 72-foot, 2 rooms and a bath streetcar, if it ran on batteries in Washington, and if it had air conditioning during the summer, the highest temperatures normally experienced in Washington, they need to have a second 72-footer filled with batteries.
I wouldn't be surprised. It's not. It's a big problem, and I don't think most people just figure, well, we'll put a pole up and it's good enough. And it's like, no, there's engineering that has to go into this. I see. I got a question. Which newspaper were you using clippings from? I was using the Dayton Daily News, the Dayton Herald, and the Xenia Gazette or the Xenia Daily Gazette.
Great.
I want to thank you for your answers, sir.
Oh, you're very welcome.
You raised a question on the electric buses. I know SEPTA in Philly had a small fleet of them. They were using them on the Route 79, Snyder Avenue.
Right.
And I don't think they were very successful. In fact, one of them not too long ago burned up.
Yeah, those were Proterras, and it seems as if they're kind of the late 2010s version of the diesel hybrid bus that so many people went out and bought because they were incentivized to do so. And it seems like every property discovered, we don't like diesel electric hybrids. And it's the same, it's sort of the same thing with the Protreras, because it's just one of those things that when that bus dies at the end of the line and it's out of power, well, now you're stuck. And you also then have to spend a significant, there's an infrastructure cost that you have to have for a place to be able to charge buses. And that's not, it doesn't happen overnight. Well, it does happen overnight. It doesn't happen immediately, I should say.
Well, the whole electrical vehicle thing is a fire concern anyway. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I come from the fire service, and you can't put them out.
Exactly. Yeah, we've seen the photos.
They just remarkable. They just burn to the end. That's it.
Yeah, burn until you run out of lithium.
Yeah, until you run out. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, a friend of mine's with the U.S. Postal Service. Congress has mandated that over half the new mail delivery vehicles are to be battery powered. And they're all scratching their heads now as where are we going to put all those charging things at the existing post offices to charge these, and where are we going to get the electricity from to do this? And yes. It is a real question.
Yeah,
they haven't really answered yet.
Well, it's one of those things that there is engineering that has to be done to say, can we get power, and where do we put all this? Because it takes a footprint and it takes maintenance. You can find people to do diesel truck maintenance. It's possible. But finding somebody to be able to do electric truck maintenance, that's kind of an industry that hasn't really shown up yet. So I don't know how they're gonna achieve what it is they're setting out to go and do, but they've got their marching orders, I guess.
I'd still like to see the life cycle cost in Boston for the battery. I don't know what you'd call it, battery with diesel heater, compared to diesel bus, compared to trackless trolley. I'd just like to see that. And I've been asking, and nobody seems to have seen such a study, such a report.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I've ever seen anything like that. But I can tell you that the one was done in Dayton in 2007. And I've got the report itself is on my website. And you really only have to read, you can read all the details to it, but you just have to go to the last page, and that'll show you, they do the computation and say, yeah, the diesel bus is cheaper to operate, but you don't get the federal funding. And because you don't get the federal funding, the big scheme of things, it's not as economically viable to be able to run the transit system.
Some organizations are now trying fuel cell electric, but pure electric battery is just not going to make it through the entire operating day.
Yeah, and then when you get into the wintertime, that's when the real problems come. And just ask anybody who owns a Tesla or any vehicle like that, where it's a 300-mile vehicle in the summertime, it's a 200-mile vehicle in the wintertime.
Hey, Tom, this week we had the big windstorms down here. We're still got areas without electricity. Did that happen up in Dayton area? And did they lose the electric lines?
I think there was a little bit of power loss, but it was mostly, I think, repaired by Sunday. There was not any effect on the RTA as far as I know.
Okay. But we had main power lines, those big ones that come out of the power stations up there on those 50-foot high steel poles that went down.
You mean the state tree of Indiana?
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
All right. I think we are going to wrap it up there since we have gone a bit off topic, but always appreciate the discussion. And I want to thank Tom again for the presentation. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Remember, if you have an idea for a future Trolleyology program, please let me know. My email is assistant@patrolley.org. Reach out anytime. And I hope you can join us in the coming weeks and months on Zoom or in person. Thank you again. Have a wonderful week, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, Kristen.